She was 25, quiet as a breath in a storm. Her name was Amara James, and to most people in the Langston mansion, she didn't exist. She worked unseen, moved like a shadow, spoke only when spoken to. But behind her calm eyes was a heart still mourning a mother who had died too soon, a woman who cleaned homes just like this one until her body gave up before her dreams ever could. Amara worked to forget. She polished marble floors until she could no longer see her reflection, hoping the ache inside her would fade with the dust she wiped away. Until one morning, everything changed. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The day had begun like any other, the hush of morning drifting through the marble corridors, the faint smell of lemon polish, and the distant hum of a vacuum echoing from somewhere down the West Hall. Amara James moved quietly, almost rhythmically, her duster gliding over the endless frames that lined the upper hallway. Each portrait looked down at her as if aware she didn't belong in their world, oil-painted faces of the Langston family, staring through time with the same cold superiority money often breeds. She worked carefully, dusting the gold edges, lifting each frame ever so slightly to clean behind it, her mind somewhere else, on the unpaid rent notice she'd folded into her apron, on the memories of her mother's hand scrubbing those same kinds of walls before cancer took her. The mansion was vast, lifeless, and expensive enough to make her grief feel small. That was how she liked it, simple, predictable, quiet. But that morning wasn't going to stay quiet. When she reached the end of the corridor, she froze. Resting on her cleaning cart was something that shouldn't have been there, a white envelope. Crisp, unbent, almost glowing under the golden light that filtered through the tall windows. Her brow furrowed. The staff never used envelopes. Messages came by radio or phone. Curious, she wiped her palms on her apron and picked it up. It was thick, expensive paper, the kind that whispered wealth even before it was opened. Her pulse quickened when she saw the writing on the front. Her name, Amara James, written in delicate golden ink. Her first instinct was disbelief. No one here called her by name. To most of them, she was the maid in black, or the quiet one. Even the head housekeeper used a whistle instead of words. So how did this envelope find her? Her heart gave a small, nervous flutter. She looked left, then right. The hallway was empty, too empty. Not a sound. No footsteps. No whispers. Just the ticking of a distant grandfather clock echoing like a heartbeat. She turned the envelope over in her hand, half expecting it to vanish. Then she noticed the seal, a thin wax emblem pressed into the flap. The initials were faint but clear, LL. Her breath hitched. Lawrence Langston. The master of the house. The reclusive billionaire who hadn't stepped beyond the East Wing in nearly 10 years. The man everyone whispered about, but no one dared to mention aloud. Rumors said he was bedridden, half paralyzed from a stroke. Others claimed he'd gone mad, living surrounded by old memories and locked doors. A few of the older maids even said they'd heard him speaking to ghosts. Amara never paid attention to gossip. She came to work, did her job, and left. But standing there now, the envelope trembling in her hand, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, curiosity mixed with fear. She hesitated for a long time, her thumb tracing the golden ink, until finally, she slipped her finger under the flap and tore it open. The faint scent of old cologne escaped, sharp and unfamiliar. Inside was a small folded note. Just one line, handwritten in neat cursive. Come to the East Wing. Room 304. 11 a.m. Come alone. LL. That was all. No explanation. No reason. Just an invitation that felt more like a command. For a moment she just stood there, staring at the words. The East Wing was forbidden territory. Every maid knew it. It was separated from the rest of the mansion by 2 locked glass doors and an unspoken rule: never cross that side. Even the security staff avoided it. They said it was where silence went to die. Amara's mind spun with questions. Why her? How did he know her name? Did she do something wrong? Was she being dismissed? She folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and tucked it into her apron pocket. Her hands felt cold. The clock on the wall read 10:21. Less than 40 minutes. She finished her cleaning, though her movements had lost their rhythm. Every sound felt sharper now: the squeak of her shoes, the creak of the cartwheels, the whisper of the dust cloth. The mansion seemed to breathe differently, like it was watching her. At 10:50, she stood at the entrance to the East Wing. The double glass doors loomed before her, reflecting her face, a face that suddenly looked younger and more frightened than she remembered. The air beyond those doors looked dimmer, the light subdued, like it hadn't been touched in years. A chill ran through her arms. She gripped the handle. It wasn't locked. Click. The door opened with a low groan, and the scent of age and antiseptic drifted out. The hall beyond was silent, not a whisper, not a hum of machinery, not even the faint vibration of life. Only stillness. She stepped inside. The floors were darker here, the paintings older, the curtains drawn. Her footsteps echoed down the marble like a soft heartbeat counting down to something she didn't understand. As she passed a series of closed doors, she noticed faint scuff marks on the walls, as if furniture had been dragged away years ago and never returned. At the far end stood a door marked 304. Her throat tightened. She raised her hand to knock, then stopped. Her palm hovered inches from the wood. What if this was a mistake? What if it wasn't meant for her? The clock struck 11. The chime echoed through the emptiness. And from inside came a faint rasping voice. Come in. Amara's breath caught in her throat. With trembling fingers, she turned the handle. The door creaked open, and for the first time in years, the East Wing welcomed someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The door creaked open, and the scent of medicine drifted out, sharp, sterile, tinged with something sweet and fading. The room was dim, curtains half-drawn, sunlight spilling in soft, uneven patches across polished floors. For a second, Amara didn't move. Her eyes adjusted slowly, tracing the outlines of old furniture draped in dust, a bookshelf lined with yellowing spines, and a single man seated near the window. He didn't turn right away, but even from behind, she could feel the weight of his awareness, the quiet authority of someone who once commanded entire rooms without raising his voice. When he finally spoke, his words were faint but deliberate. "Close the door, Miss James." Her pulse spiked. He knew her name. She obeyed silently, the latch clicking shut behind her. "Come closer." His tone was fragile but expectant. She stepped forward, her shoes tapping lightly against the marble until she stopped a few feet away. The man by the window turned his head slightly. His face, though pale, was striking, skin drawn thin across high cheekbones, eyes the color of frost, watching her with unsettling clarity. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit." She hesitated, unsure if she was intruding on something sacred. Still she obeyed, lowering herself onto the edge of the chair. A brief silence hung between them, that kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room but reshapes it. 3 years, he said suddenly. Amara blinked. "That's how long you've worked here." 3 years without a single complaint. No gossip, no lateness, no mistakes. His tone wasn't flattering, it was factual, like he'd studied her the way others studied ledgers. She nodded slightly. I try to do my work properly, sir. I've noticed. Her hands gripped each other in her lap. I didn't know you were watching. I watch everything that still belongs to me, he said, almost to himself. Then, meeting her eyes again, the house. The people. The walls that keep me alive. Something about the way he said alive made her uneasy, as if it meant something other than living. Do you know why I called you here? She shook her head. He looked out toward the gardens beyond the glass, where autumn leaves swayed in the pale morning light. Because I'm running out of time, he said simply. No tremor in his voice, no trace of pity, only a dry acknowledgement, like a man reading his own obituary. Amara said nothing. He turned his gaze back to her. I don't need a maid anymore. She swallowed. I'm sorry, sir, if I... He raised a thin hand, silencing her. You misunderstand. I don't mean I want you dismissed. A beat. I mean I need you for something else. Her brow furrowed. Something else. Someone I can trust. The word trust lingered like perfume, unexpected, almost misplaced between them. Amara's instinct was to step back, but curiosity anchored her. Trust for what? She asked softly. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for something beside his chair, a small wooden box, dark and worn, as though it had lived several lifetimes. He placed it carefully on the low table between them. This, he said, his eyes on the box, is the beginning of everything I ruined. Her gaze shifted between him and the object. It didn't look like much, no lock, no mark, just a box. Yet the gravity in his tone made it feel heavier than it appeared. He went on. If you open it tomorrow, you'll see things that will change how you see me, maybe even how you see yourself. Amara frowned. And if I don't? Then you'll walk away, and no one will blame you. His voice dropped lower now, almost fragile. But if you choose to stay, I'll tell you everything before I go. Her chest tightened at the quiet certainty in his words. He wasn't asking for help, he was inviting her into his confession. She stared at the box, smooth edges, faint scent of cedar, not even large enough to hold anything valuable. Yet it pulled at her like something alive. You don't even know me, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He studied her. That's why I trust you. The answer startled her. He wasn't joking. There was no trace of manipulation, just tired sincerity. People who want something, he continued, always talk too much. You don't. You listen. You move like someone trying to disappear, and people who live quietly tend to see what others miss. The observation unsettled her, not because it was untrue, but because it was too true. He leaned back, exhausted, his eyes softening. I've lived too long surrounded by noise and liars. I'd like my last days to be spent with honesty, even if it hurts. Neither spoke for a long time. Outside, a gust of wind brushed the windowpane, carrying the faint rustle of leaves. Amara looked again at the wooden box, the object sitting silently between them like a beating heart. Every instinct told her to walk away, to pretend this never happened. But another part of her, the same quiet, stubborn part that had survived loss and loneliness, refused to leave. When do you want me to open it? She asked finally. His lips curved slightly, just enough to form the faintest trace of a smile. Tomorrow morning. Same time. She nodded. I'll come. He exhaled, a sound that might have been relief or resignation. Then your real work begins. For a moment, their eyes met, two strangers, separated by age and wealth, bound suddenly by something neither could name. When she rose to leave, the floor creaked under her steps. The sound broke the silence like a closing curtain. At the door, She turned once more. He was still by the window, watching the light shift through the glass, a faint shadow of a man preparing to face everything he'd buried. Amara closed the door softly behind her, the echo fading into the long, cold hallway, and with it, the faint certainty that tomorrow would change everything. That night, the mansion seemed louder than usual, the pipes groaning, the clock ticking like it was counting down to something inevitable. Amara lay in bed, eyes open, replaying every second of her meeting. The look in Mr. Langston's eyes wasn't just sorrow, it was urgency, the kind that belongs to a man measuring life in hours instead of years. And that box. She could still smell the cedar in her mind. By morning, her decision was made. When the sun cracked through the blinds, she was already up, dressed, and walking. Each step toward the east wing carried the weight of something she didn't understand yet. Not fear, not exactly duty, but a quiet pull she couldn't ignore. When she entered the room, he was waiting, not slumped, not frail but alert. Almost expectant. The box sat on the table again, same place, same stillness. "You came," he said. "I told you I would." He studied her for a long moment, as though searching for something behind her calm. "Most people promise out of pity," he murmured. "You promise like it means something." "It does," she replied simply. A flicker of a smile touched his face, faint, human. He nodded toward the box. "Then let's begin." Amara sat across from him. Her palms felt warm, her throat dry. She lifted the lid carefully. Inside there was no money, no jewelry, only a single tarnished silver key and a folded yellow sheet of paper. Her brows drew together. "A key to the part of this house that even the walls forgot," he said. He gestured toward the far corner. "Behind that painting, the ship." Amara turned. The large canvas of a storm at sea dominated the wall, elegant but lifeless, like every piece of art in the mansion. She crossed the room, touched the edge of the frame, and felt a metal ridge beneath her fingertips. Hidden in the molding was a lock, nearly invisible. The key slid in perfectly. A single turn, and a click echoed through the quiet. The wall shifted, revealing a narrow door she'd never noticed. She looked back. He gave a single nod. "Go on." The hinges groaned as she pushed. Air heavy with dust spilled out, carrying the faint scent of books and something older, something like regret. The room was small, lined with shelves. Boxes stacked in corners, papers tied in string, a desk covered with a sheet. Everything untouched for decades. It felt less like a study and more like a tomb, a place built to bury memories rather than objects. Mr. Langston's voice broke the silence. "That room was mine. Before the money. Before the mistakes." He wheeled himself closer, stopping at the doorway but not entering. His eyes stayed on the room like it might bite him if he crossed the threshold. "I locked it 25 years ago. I thought if I sealed it away, I could seal away the man I used to be." Amara stepped inside. The floor creaked under her shoes. On the desk sat a photo frame face down, the glass covered in dust. She lifted it gently, wiped it clean with her sleeve, and froze. A young woman smiled back, dark-skinned, soft eyes, a calm that felt alive even through fading color. In her arms, a baby barely a year old. There was warmth in that photo, the kind that time can't fake. "Who is she?" Amara asked softly. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his voice came, cracked but steady. "Her name was Evelyn. And that child was mine." Amara turned. His gaze was locked on the picture, his fingers gripping the armrest of his chair. "You had a family," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Once. Before I traded them for ambition." The words hung in the air, heavy, irretrievable. I wanted everything, he continued. Money, control, a name that meant something. I thought I could build it and come back to them when it was done. His voice broke into a whisper. But when I came back, they were gone. Amara set the photo down carefully, almost afraid it might shatter. You never found them? I stopped looking, he said. Or maybe I just couldn't face what I'd find. The confession sat between them, raw and unpolished. He pointed toward the desk. Open the drawer. She pulled it open. Inside were dozens of envelopes, arranged in a perfect row, numbered in red ink, 1, 2, 3. Each yellowed and frayed at the corners. Read the first one, he said. Amara hesitated. You wrote these. Every year since the day I left her. Letters I never sent. She took the one marked 1. The paper was thin, edges curled from age. His handwriting was small, deliberate, each word pressed deep into the page, as if carved instead of written. She began reading aloud. May 9, 1961. My name is Lawrence Langston. I'm 18 years old, and today, I stole my first dollar. She glanced up, uncertain. He nodded for her to continue. I didn't want to. Hunger isn't a reason, it's an excuse. I told myself I'd pay it back, but I never did. Instead, I bought bread and shared it with Evelyn. She smiled when I handed it to her. That was the first time I realized love could make a thief feel clean. The room went silent. Even the clock seemed to pause. Amara folded the letter carefully. You kept all these? Every lie I told myself. Every truth I was too proud to speak. His eyes were glassy now, fixed on something beyond her. She believed in me when I was nothing. I swore I'd make her proud. Instead, I made myself rich and her invisible. Amara didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The weight of his remorse was real, the kind that doesn't beg forgiveness because it knows it doesn't deserve any. After a moment, he looked at her again. Will you keep reading tomorrow? She met his gaze. Yes. He nodded once. Then maybe I can finally rest. Amara placed the letter back in the drawer, closed it gently, and turned off the lamp. The room felt different now, not haunted but awake. As she left, she looked one last time at the photo of Evelyn and the baby. Their smiles still lingered, unbroken by time. For the first time in years, the East Wing didn't feel dead. It felt like it was listening. The next morning came gray and heavy. Rain gathered quietly against the windows of the servants' quarters, each drop ticking like a metronome to the thoughts she couldn't silence. Amara had read only one letter, but it lingered in her chest as though it belonged to her. When the clock struck 11, she was already standing in front of the East Wing door. No hesitation this time. Only a quiet certainty. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tea and old paper. Mr. Langston was awake, sitting by the window again, the same box beside him. His face looked paler, the lines deeper. But his eyes, they were clearer than yesterday. You came early, he said. I wanted to finish what we started. He gestured toward the secret door. Then let's open the past again. Amara crossed the room, turned the small key, and pushed. The old hinges groaned as if reluctant to remember. She stepped into the study, switched on the small lamp, and sat at the desk where yesterday's letter still lay. Mr. Langston remained in the doorway, half in shadow. Second envelope, he said. She opened the drawer. The paper crackled softly beneath her fingers. The one marked 2 felt heavier, darker somehow. She unfolded it and began reading. July 4, 1962. Evelyn said she's pregnant. I should be terrified, but I'm not. For the first time, I feel alive. I promised her I'd build a future for the three of us. I meant it, I truly did. Amara's voice grew steadier as she read. I started working in garages, cleaning engines, saving every coin. I wanted to make her proud. But the world doesn't wait for good intentions. Money came too slowly. Pride came too fast. She stopped. You were 19? Barely, he said. But I thought I was invincible. She continued. I told Evelyn I'd go north to find work, maybe New York. I thought it would take a month. It took a lifetime. Amara looked up. You left before the child was born. He nodded. I told myself it was temporary. But ambition has a way of stretching promises until they snap. She wrote to me once. The letter went on. Said the baby kicked when she heard my name. I swore I'd come back before he was born. I didn't. And when I finally did, they were gone. Amara placed the letter down gently. The paper trembled in her hands. You searched for them, she said. For years, he replied. But every road ended in silence. I hired men, checked hospitals, churches, birth records, nothing. It was like they'd been erased. He wheeled himself a little closer to the open door. The light from the study spilled across his face, illuminating the tremor in his jaw. The world called it success when I built my first company. They didn't know I built it on the hope of finding her again. Amara listened quietly. There was something painfully human about the way he said her name without saying it, like it still burned his throat. He nodded toward the drawer again. There's a third letter. Read that one too. She hesitated, sensing it would cut deeper. But she reached for it anyway. The envelope marked 3 was thinner, the ink faded, edges worn soft. She unfolded it carefully. March 10, 1964. Evelyn left no note. Just an empty house and a photograph. I told myself she betrayed me. It was easier than admitting I drove her away. The rain outside intensified, tapping harder against the windows. I built my fortune to forget her. Each dollar buried her memory a little deeper. But the richer I became, the poorer I felt. Success is a cruel kind of silence. It drowns everything but guilt. Amara's voice softened to a whisper. You still loved her. He closed his eyes. I never stopped. 10 years passed before I saw her name again. The letter continued. A file crossed my desk, a request for funding from a small school in Chicago. The applicant, Evelyn Monroe. Amara's head snapped up. Was it her? It was. I wanted to call, to write, to say I was sorry. But pride told me to wait. I convinced myself she'd reach out first. She never did. Amara's eyes moved to the final lines. 2 years later, I read about a fire. The school burned down. The report said no survivors. Her breath hitched. She looked up sharply. You went there, didn't you? Yes, he said quietly. There was nothing left. Just ashes and my own arrogance. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the rain. He spoke again, voice low but steady. I thought that was the end of her story, and mine. Until 10 years later, a name appeared again. A nurse at a shelter told me a child had survived the fire. Amara froze. The baby. My son, he whispered. He was alive. Her pulse quickened. You found him. Almost. But the trail vanished again. Different name, no records. I searched until I couldn't anymore. He turned his gaze toward the window, the glass fogged from his breath. He'd be a grown man now. Somewhere out there, living with another name, carrying the cost of my choices without knowing why. Amara sat back slowly, trying to steady the rush in her chest. The letters weren't just confessions, they were maps of a broken life. "That's what you meant," she said softly, "when you said the box held what you ruined." "Yes," he answered. "Everything I ever loved that I couldn't keep." She closed the last letter and returned it to the drawer. Her hand lingered there for a moment, resting on the smooth wood. "Do you still want to find him?" she asked. He looked up at her, tired eyes, faint but burning. "More than I want to keep breathing." The honesty in his tone hit her harder than the story itself. Amara stood, her fingers still trembling. "Then let's find him," she said quietly. His lips parted, almost in disbelief. "You'd do that for me?" "For him," she said. "Everyone deserves to know where they come from." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a trembling hand, he pointed to the shelf beside the desk. "There's a folder. Brown. My last attempt to trace him. Take it." She picked it up. Inside were clipped newspaper articles, hospital records, and a single grainy photograph of a boy, maybe 5 or 6, standing in front of a burned building. Her heart sank. The boy's eyes looked familiar. "He's out there," Mr. Langston said. "I can feel it." Amara nodded, gripping the folder tight. Outside, the rain finally eased into silence. For the first time, the room didn't feel haunted. It felt like a story waiting for its ending. The rain had stopped by the time Amara left the mansion that evening, but the air still tasted of storm. She walked home with the brown folder pressed to her chest like a living thing, afraid it might disappear if she loosened her grip. Inside were fragments of a life, birth records, burnt addresses, a newspaper clipping from the 70s. And that photograph, the boy with the solemn eyes standing before a ruin. She spent the night at her kitchen table, the folder spread open before her. Her small apartment smelled of coffee and bleach, a familiar comfort. Each document she touched felt heavier than the last. Most names were smudged by time, but one kept returning: Gloria Hart, a nurse who had signed the intake record of a male child unidentified, approximately 6 years old after the Chicago fire. No surname. No family. Only a note, transferred to foster care, 1974. Amara scribbled the name on a piece of paper, circled it twice, then reached for her phone. Hospitals. Social services. Old directories. Each call led to another dead end, until one quiet voice on the other end of a long-forgotten line said, "Gloria Hart?" Yes, she retired years ago. Lives near Port Haven now, on the coast. By morning, Amara had packed a small bag and borrowed her neighbor's car. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just drove. The highway stretched for hours, gray and endless, the kind of road where thoughts become louder than sound. She thought of Mr. Langston, the way he stared out the window as if searching for ghosts. She thought of Evelyn and the baby in the photograph. And she thought of the words he'd said, "Someone I can trust." Now she understood why he'd chosen her. He needed someone with nothing to gain, no reason to lie. When she reached Port Haven, the town felt like it had been waiting decades to be remembered. Salt in the air. Cracked sidewalks. Houses with paint peeled by the sea. She found the nurse's address on an old mailbox at the edge of town, faded letters spelling G. Hart. Gloria was in her 80s now, sitting on a porch wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were clear though time had turned her hands to paper. When Amara introduced herself and mentioned Lawrence Langston's name, the old woman stiffened. "You shouldn't say that name here," she murmured. "He's dying," Amara said quietly. "He asked me to find his son." The woman's gaze softened. "So he finally remembers." She gestured toward the empty chair beside her. "Sit, child." Amara obeyed. "That boy," Gloria began, "came to us after the fire. We didn't know his name. Didn't know if he had anyone left. He was quiet, polite. Never cried. Just drew pictures of houses." Amara listened closely. "One day, a woman came asking about him," Gloria continued. "Said she was a volunteer. Brought food, blankets, stayed late. She'd sit by his bed and hum him to sleep. The child never spoke, but he started to smile again. She said she'd come every week." Amara's fingers clenched around the edge of her chair. What was her name? Gloria's eyes grew distant, searching through years. "Ruth," she said. "Ruth James." The name struck Amara like a blow. Her mouth went dry. "James." "Yes," Gloria nodded. "Pretty woman. Kind eyes." She wanted to adopt the boy, but the papers took too long. Then one day, she stopped coming. The boy was placed with another family. They moved away not long after. Amara couldn't breathe. She gripped her knees to steady herself. "Miss, are you all right?" Amara forced a nod. "Do you remember what she looked like?" Gloria smiled faintly. "I remember kindness when I see it." "Why?" But Amara couldn't answer. Her mother's face was already there in her mind. The same soft smile, the same eyes that had never spoken of the past. It all made sense now, the quiet sadness in her mother's gaze, the way she'd pause when the news mentioned Chicago, the photograph she kept hidden in a worn Bible she never let Amara touch. When she finally found her voice, it came out as a whisper. "That boy, he could still be alive?" "If life was kind to him, yes," Gloria said. "But I always wondered what became of him." Amara stood slowly, clutching the folder to her chest again. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. The nurse nodded gently. "Tell Mr. Langston. Some debts can still be paid." Amara walked back to the car in a daze. The sky had turned gold at the edges, evening pressing down over the horizon. She sat behind the wheel, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror, her mother's reflection staring back through her own eyes. The truth felt impossible, yet undeniable. Her mother had known the child, had cared for him, had almost adopted him. And that meant the boy Mr. Langston lost had once been part of her mother's life too. A knot of fear and realization tightened in her chest. If her mother had tried to adopt him, that meant her family's story, her story, was already bound to his before she was even born. She whispered into the empty car. "Mama, what did you never tell me?" The sea wind answered with silence. When she returned to the mansion 2 days later, she looked different, not in her clothes or her walk, but in her eyes. There was knowledge now. Heavy, unshakable. Mr. Langston looked up when she entered. "You found something," he said. Amara set the folder on his lap. "Yes," she replied. "And I think you should prepare yourself." "For what?" "For the truth." The old man's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Inside were the nurse's notes, the adoption forms, and a single name written in fading ink, the one that made his breath catch. "Ruth James," he whispered. "She was." Amara met his eyes. "She was my mother." Silence fell between them, deep and long. The clock ticked once, then again. "Then you," he began, voice shaking. Amara nodded before he could finish. "Yes. The woman you asked to trust you was the daughter of the one who tried to save your son." For the first time, the old man's composure broke. His eyes filled with tears he'd buried for half a lifetime. "Your mother was the only good thing that ever touched my life twice," he said hoarsely. And in that moment, Amara understood. This wasn't just his story anymore. It was hers too. The room was so quiet that even the rain outside seemed to pause. Mr. Langston's hands rested on the folder Amara had brought, his fingertips brushing her mother's name like it was made of glass. "Ruth James," he whispered again, as if saying it might summon her back. She was kind, gentle. I remember her face now. She worked here, years ago, before my illness. She brought tea one evening when I was too weak to feed myself. She never looked at me with pity, only with understanding. He blinked hard, his voice thinning. I didn't know she had a daughter. Amara's throat tightened. "She never spoke about this," she said softly. "But she must have known who you were. Maybe she thought it would only hurt us both." The old man's eyes drifted toward the window where the light slanted weakly through the curtains. "She tried to save what was left of my family," he murmured. "And now you're here, doing the same." Amara didn't reply. She couldn't. The air between them was thick with decades of regret and the strange symmetry of fate. After a long pause, he straightened slightly. "There was a file," he said suddenly. "One I could never finish reading. It might help you find him." He pointed toward the lower drawer of the desk in the hidden study. Amara opened it carefully. Inside was a manila folder bound with a red string. The paper was brittle, but the ink was still legible. At the top, Adoption Records, Juvenile Care Unit, Chicago 1974. She flipped through each page, fragments of addresses, letters, signatures that had faded into ghosts. But one page caught her eye. A transfer form, David Reeve, placement confirmed, Brooklyn, New York. Her breath caught. "This is him," she said. Langston leaned forward, his frail voice trembling. "Read it." Transferred from foster home to permanent family placement in 1980. Current name, David Reeve. The name echoed through the room. A man who'd been searching for decades now had a name to match the face that haunted him. Langston's eyes glistened. After all these years. He reached for the folder but stopped, his hand shaking midair. Amara moved closer and placed it gently in his grasp. "He could still be alive," she said. "He'd be in his 50s now. That's not too late." "No," he murmured, "it's not." There was a pause, then the faintest trace of hope lit his tired eyes. "Find him, Amara. Not for me. For him. He deserves to know where he came from." Amara nodded slowly. "I will." She spent the next 3 days searching. Phone calls, directories, records, anything she could trace from that single name. Most numbers were dead ends. Some addresses no longer existed. But Amara was relentless. Every evening, she returned to the East Wing to update Mr. Langston, and every evening his voice grew weaker but his eyes sharper, more alive than they'd been in years. On the fourth morning, she found something. An old listing from a community center in Brooklyn. David Reeve, music teacher. She stared at the screen until her heart began to race. A school address. A contact number. She picked up the phone before doubt could stop her. The call rang once, twice, then a voice calm and deep. David Reeve speaking. Her mouth went dry. "Mr. Reeve? My name is Amara James. I'm calling on behalf of someone who's been looking for you for a very long time." Silence. Then, cautious curiosity. "Who?" "Lawrence Langston." Another pause, longer this time. When he finally spoke, his tone was tight, controlled. "That name means nothing to me." "It should," she said gently. "He's your father." The silence that followed was heavier than words. Amara could almost hear the years collapsing between them. "If this is some kind of joke." "It's not," she interrupted softly. "I have proof." Letters. Photographs. Records that connect you both. The line stayed quiet. Then a sigh, the sound of a man who'd just been handed a past he never asked for. "Why now?" he asked. "Because he's dying," Amara said. "And because he's never stopped searching for you." Another silence, shorter this time, but waited. "Where is he?" "Still in the mansion. He wants to see you, only if you're willing." David's voice lowered, almost a whisper. "I'll think about it." And then the line went dead. Amara lowered the phone and exhaled slowly. Her hands were shaking, but there was no fear, only an ache that ran deep and clean, like the kind you feel before something important breaks open. That evening, she told Mr. Langston everything. "You spoke to him?" "Yes." "And?" "He didn't believe me. But he didn't hang up right away either." A flicker of something crossed the old man's face. Hope, fear, disbelief. "That's more than I deserve," he said softly. He leaned back in his chair, staring toward the window where the sky had begun to fade into dusk. "If he comes," he whispered, "I don't know what I'll say." "Then don't plan it," Amara replied. "Just speak." He smiled faintly. "You sound like your mother." The words caught her off guard, but she didn't look away. She always said the same thing, that the truth doesn't need to be perfect, just honest. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening with memory. She was right. Always was. 2 days later, as Amara was polishing the brass banister in the main hall, a car pulled up outside the mansion gates. Through the glass doors, she saw a man step out, tall, broad-shouldered, maybe in his early 50s. His hair was flecked with gray, his posture careful but assured. He paused at the entrance, staring up at the house like it was part of a story he'd tried to forget. Amara opened the door before he could knock. "David Reeve." He nodded once. "You must be Amara." She smiled faintly. "He's waiting for you." And as she led him through the long, silent hall toward the east wing, every clock in the mansion seemed to hold its breath. The east wing had never felt so still. Even the air seemed to wait. The long corridor, once cold and uninviting, now carried the quiet echo of footsteps, slow, deliberate, human. Amara walked a few paces ahead, her hands clasped, her heart drumming in rhythm with each step behind her. When they reached the door of room 304, she turned to the man following her. David Reeve stood there, uncertain. The years had carved gentleness into his face, not weakness, but the kind of patience that comes from surviving too much and asking too little. "He's inside," Amara said softly. David hesitated. "What if he doesn't remember me?" "He never forgot you," she replied. "Not for a single day." He took a deep breath, then reached for the handle. The door creaked open. Mr. Langston was sitting by the window again, as always, the light wrapping around him like a thin shroud. He didn't turn at first. His voice, when it came, was faint but aware. "Amara." "Not this time," she said quietly. The old man turned, and froze. His eyes widened, his lips parted slightly as if a ghost had stepped through the wall. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them vibrated with all the words that had waited 40 years to be spoken. David stood still, unsure whether to move or bow his head. The lines of the old man's face softened. "Samuel," he breathed. The name struck the air like a prayer. David swallowed hard. "I don't go by that name anymore." "I know," Langston whispered. "But I do." He motioned weakly toward the chair beside him. "Come closer. Please." David approached, his footsteps measured. He stopped a few feet away, studying the man before him, this stranger who had given him life and then vanished from it. "I don't remember you," David said quietly. I know, Langston answered. But I remember you. His voice trembled now, the composure he had carried for decades breaking like thin glass. You had a birthmark on your shoulder, shaped like a crescent. You laughed when the dog barked. You cried when music stopped. You loved honey but not bread. David's eyes widened, something fragile flickering behind them. How could you possibly remember that? Because I never forgot, Langston whispered. Not one detail. Not one moment. Every night for years, I tried to picture your face before I slept, so I wouldn't lose it. Even when I thought you were gone, I kept seeing you. David's jaw tightened. If you remembered me that much, why did you leave? The question hit like a blade, not cruel, just honest. Langston lowered his gaze. Because I was foolish enough to believe I could buy back time. I chased success thinking it would make me worthy of being your father. By the time I realized what I'd lost, you were already gone. Silence fell. The kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from too many truths colliding at once. Finally, David sat down. His movements were stiff, hesitant, like he was afraid the floor might give way beneath him. You know, he said slowly, my foster father used to tell me that some men are built to love the world, and others are built to love one person. He said the worst mistake is trying to do both. Langston gave a faint, sad smile. He was right. Their eyes met, one pair heavy with guilt, the other with cautious forgiveness. Amara stood by the door, silent, watching two lives trying to stitch themselves back together. After a long pause, Langston reached toward the wooden box beside him and opened it one last time. Inside were 3 items, the photograph of Evelyn and the baby, a letter folded in half, and a small silver ring. He lifted the photo first. His hands trembled. Your mother, he said. I loved her more than anything I ever built. I failed her, too. But I kept this. Every day. Every single day. David took the photograph carefully. His eyes softened as he studied the woman who had given him life. She's beautiful. She was more than that, Langston replied. She was hope. He then handed David the folded letter. I wrote this the day I learned you were alive. I never had the courage to send it. David unfolded it slowly. The ink was faded, but the words were raw. I don't want forgiveness. I just want to know you're breathing the same air. He stopped reading halfway, unable to continue. You could have found me, David said quietly. I tried, Langston replied. Every road led to silence. Until Amara. He turned toward her. She's the reason you're standing here. She gave me one last chance to make this right. David looked at Amara, then back at his father. His expression softened, not completely, but enough to let warmth through the cracks. He reached forward and took Langston's frail hand. The old man's breath caught. I can't promise I'll forget the years you weren't there, David said. But maybe I can start with the one you are. Tears filled Langston's eyes. His voice came out as a whisper. That's more mercy than I deserve. David squeezed his hand gently. Maybe mercy isn't about what you deserve, he said. Maybe it's about what you need. For a long time, neither spoke again. They just sat, father and son, bound not by years but by the courage to face them. Amara stood quietly by the door, tears forming in her eyes. She had seen forgiveness before, but never like this, not as words, but as silence shared between two hearts learning how to beat in rhythm again. The light outside had shifted to gold. Dust floated through the air like fragments of time finally settling. When Mr. Langston spoke again, his voice was barely a breath. You've given me peace, he said. Both of you. David smiled faintly. Rest, then. Langston nodded weakly, his gaze fixed on the fading sky. "I will now." And for the first time in 40 years, he looked content. The house was silent the next morning. Even the wind outside seemed unwilling to disturb it. The staff whispered as they moved through the halls, carrying breakfast trays and linens with unusual care. Everyone knew something had changed, not from what they saw, but from what they felt. When Amara entered the east wing, the light was soft and pale. Mr. Langston was awake, though weaker than the day before. The lines around his mouth had deepened, and his breathing came in careful, deliberate pulls. David sat beside him, silent, fingers laced together in a quiet vigil. Amara placed a fresh pot of tea on the side table. The scent of chamomile drifted faintly through the air. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked gently. David shook his head. "He didn't want me to leave." Langston smiled faintly, his voice a thin thread. "The boy waited 40 years. I wasn't letting him go that easy." Amara couldn't help but smile. "You sound stronger today." "That's what forgiveness does," he murmured. "It gives the dying something worth living for, even if only for a little while." He motioned toward the window. "Open the curtains, will you?" She did. The light poured in, soft and golden, flooding the room in warmth. For a moment, it didn't look like the chamber of an old man. It looked like peace. Langston turned to David. "There's something I need you to do." David leaned closer. "Behind the bookshelf," Langston said, "you'll find a safe. The code is 0407. Your mother's birthday." David hesitated, then stood and found the small hidden panel behind a row of dusty novels. The lock clicked open. Inside were no piles of cash, no property deeds, just a handful of envelopes and a small wooden frame. He pulled them out and brought them to his father. Langston took the first envelope and held it out to David. "These are letters for you. Some from before you were born. Some after. I wrote them when I didn't have the courage to face you." David accepted them silently, the paper trembling in his hands. "And this one," Langston said, nodding toward the last envelope, "is for her." Amara frowned. "For me?" "Yes." His voice thinned. "It's not a payment, Miss James. It's gratitude. Something your mother gave me once, I couldn't repay. But maybe I can now." He gestured weakly toward the frame. Inside was a photograph, Ruth James, Amara's mother, standing by the mansion gates, smiling faintly, sunlight spilling over her shoulder. On the back, in faded ink, were 6 words, "She taught me how to be kind." Amara's throat tightened. She traced the edges of the frame with trembling fingers. "You kept this." "Every day," he whispered. "I kept it because she reminded me I still had a soul." The clock on the wall ticked louder now, each second a slow descent. Langston's breathing grew shallower. "You should rest," Amara said softly. "No," he replied. "Not yet." He turned to David once more. "Son, I spent a lifetime learning how to make things last. But the only things that ever did were the ones I gave away. Remember that." David's eyes glistened. He nodded silently. Langston exhaled slowly, then looked to Amara. "You were my last act of grace," he said. "You and your mother. You gave me peace when I thought it was impossible." She blinked back tears. "You gave me purpose." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then we're even." The room fell quiet again, the kind of stillness that feels sacred. Outside, the wind shifted, gentle, carrying the distant hum of church bells from the town below. Langston's gaze drifted to the window. "Do you believe in heaven?" he asked softly. David hesitated. "I'd like to." Then I'll see her there, Langston said. And when I do, I'll tell her our boy found his way home. The words hung in the light like a blessing. His head tilted slightly toward the sun, his breath slowing until it simply stopped. Amara froze. David bowed his head. No sound, no struggle, just a quiet surrender, like someone finally stepping out of a long storm. Amara placed her hand gently over his. "Rest now, sir," she whispered. David sat there for a long time, eyes wet, the letters still in his lap. When the doctor came an hour later, the room remained unchanged, peaceful, untouched by panic. By evening, the lawyer arrived. Most of the estate was left to charities, hospitals, schools, foundations for children without homes. But one envelope was addressed by hand, for Amara James. Inside was a letter written in his unmistakable script. "You came into my life as a maid and left as my redemption. Your mother once gave me a reason to live. You gave me a reason to die without fear. I've arranged a scholarship in your name, for girls who work, dream, and hope like you once did. Use it to build the life Ruth imagined for you." Amara pressed the letter to her chest, tears finally breaking free. David placed a hand on her shoulder. "He meant every word," he said. She nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the sun dipped behind the hills, scattering gold through the windows, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if the mansion itself exhaled. The man who had built it with guilt had left it behind with grace. And in that stillness, Amara realized something she'd never said aloud: forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It redeems the living who choose to remember it kindly. 3 days after the funeral, the mansion was quiet again. Most of the staff had gone, the lawyers had finished their duties, and the East Wing stood open for the first time in decades. Amara walked its corridor slowly, the echo of her footsteps mixing with memories. She paused at the door of room 304. The bed was neatly made, the chair by the window empty. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, warm and steady, as if nothing tragic had ever happened there. She placed fresh flowers on the table beside the window. In her hands, she carried his final letter, the one she hadn't yet opened. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, like the box that had started it all. She unfolded it carefully. "Dear Amara, if you're reading this, I've already gone to where forgiveness doesn't need words. You came into my life not to serve, but to save, not by erasing my mistakes, but by letting me face them. Your mother once brought me light. You carried it further. Promise me you'll live your life with courage, not caution. The world owes you nothing, but kindness will repay you in ways I never could." Her vision blurred as she finished the letter. The words were heavy yet gentle, the kind that stayed long after they'd been read. Amara folded it neatly and tucked it into her pocket. Then she walked out into the garden behind the mansion, the same garden her mother had once spoken about when she was alive, describing it as a place where sorrow forgets to breathe. The air smelled of rain and roses. The grass was damp beneath her shoes. She stood there for a long time, looking toward the horizon, where the first hints of dusk glowed orange and gold. In her mind, she could still hear his voice, weary, hopeful, finally at peace. And somewhere in that silence, her mother's laughter echoed too. "Mama," she whispered, "I did it. I helped him find his way." A small breeze stirred, brushing her cheek like a touch she'd been waiting for. She smiled through her tears. Not far away, David Reeve approached. He stood beside her quietly, holding a single lily. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Two children of different worlds, now bound by the same story, one built from loss, the other from forgiveness. After a moment, he said softly, "He left a foundation in your name. The first girl starts school next spring." Amara nodded. "Then his piece is still working." The wind picked up gently, scattering petals across the grass. She watched them drift upward, glowing in the fading light, and felt something shift inside, not sadness but release. For the first time since her mother's death, Amara smiled fully. Not because the pain was gone, but because love had found its way home, at last. Some stories don't end with grand gestures or miracles. They end quietly, with peace. A peace earned through pain, kindness, and the courage to forgive what can't be changed. Amara never returned to her old life. She used the scholarship he left her name on to build something new, a small home for girls without families, where hope wasn't charity, but inheritance. Each child that walked through her doors carried the same promise her mother once carried, to keep love alive, even when the world forgets it. David visited often. Sometimes they spoke of the past. Other times, they just sat in silence, watching the garden that had once belonged to a man they both learned to forgive. The mansion, once filled with pride and secrets, had become something else entirely, a place where loss had bloomed into legacy. People in town still spoke of Lawrence Langston, the billionaire who vanished from the world, only to leave it better than he found it. But Amara knew the truth. He hadn't been saved by wealth, or even by confession. He'd been saved by mercy, the kind her mother taught, and she lived by. And in the evenings, when the sun touched the garden just right, she swore she could still hear him say, "You gave me peace." To which she always whispered, "And you taught me what it means to forgive." And if this story meant something to you, share it. Because somewhere, someone still believes it's too late to make peace. And maybe, this will tell them it isn't. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.